Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through a cracked wooden door behind an Elizabethan stage where the air smells like roasted turnips the actors haven't slept, and someone's already yelling about dog parts. You crouch low beside a pile of hay that may or may not be covering a chamber pot, as someone in a sackcloth tunic barks literally for attention. You're not dreaming. Yet. The late 1500s weren't exactly known for their subtlety, especially when it came to theater. If you're expecting velvet curtains and polite applause, you're in for a rude awakening. You're standing in the back room of a playhouse, possibly the Curtain or the Early Globe. It's dawn, and the troops are already rehearsing more accurately, bickering about who gets to play what. Not who plays Macbeth. Not who gets the romantic lead. No, they're squabbling about who gets to crawl around pretending to be a dog. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not a noble here. You're not even a playwright. You're a low-ranking apprentice actor in a company with more fleas than funding, and your current job is to drag a half-eaten meat pie off stage while barking convincingly. Congratulations. You've made it. Outside, the city of London is just starting to wake up smoke, curling from crooked chimneys, chamber pots dumped unceremoniously into the gutters, and the Thames carrying more secrets than sewage. But inside this playhouse, it's chaos. A tall, wiry man with sunken cheeks and an ego like a peacock is yelling, "I played Crab the dog last week. Let someone else do the crawling." His voice echoes off the rafters. Another actor, shorter, rounder, and considerably hairier, responds with, "You bark like a strangled goose, Tobias. Let the dog work fall to those what can whimper with dignity." Crab the dog, by the way, is a real role in Two Gentlemen of Verona. And yes, historians still argue whether it was intended to be played by an actual dog or an actor in fur. In your troupe's case, there's no budget for trained animals, so it falls to whoever's most desperate to be remembered. You stand near a barrel of apples that have definitely gone soft listening to the rehearsal, devolve into something more gladiatorial than artistic. It seems absurd, and yet there's a twisted sense of hierarchy here. Because dog roles aren't just jokes, they're oddly beloved. A dog done well can bring down the house. A poorly played pooch, on the other hand, risks rotten produce to the face. It doesn't help that the audience, the rowdy ale-drenched groundlings, love dog scenes. They chant for them. They laugh until they wheeze. You saw one man tip over entirely during a performance of Henry IV, just because the dog chased a wig across the stage. The stage manager, a man who smells strongly of onions and regret, waves a wooden baton in the air and says, "Less shrieking, more shriveling, Tobias, on your knees." Tobias, the man previously protesting, drops down into a crouch with a theatrical sigh and begins to scratch behind his ear with a convincingly miserable whine. You'd applaud if you weren't also covered in yesterday's stage blood and genuinely concerned about where the fleas from the dog costume go when the show's over. You're handed a prop, a chain collar made of stiff rope. Your role today is to walk the dog on stage during Act 3 and then get pulled off balance when it tries to attack the villain. You were hoping for something more glamorous, but you're new. Everyone starts low. Even the guy who plays Henry VIII once did 2 seasons as a talking goat. Still, There's something charming about this mess. The wooden beams overhead are soot-stained and crooked. The costumes are stitched by candlelight and patched so many times they look like patchwork maps of frustration. The makeup is flour soot and grease, and no one here knows what method acting means unless it involves real crying or actual injury. And yet, there's magic. Somehow. When the audience roars with laughter or gasps in collective awe when someone hits a perfect monologue or a comic beat lands so well it gets echoed by drunkards in the back row, that's the stuff. That's the fuel. Backstage, a young actor named Kit is practicing his bark. Less terrier, more tragic, the lead actor advises, sipping something murky from a leather flask. You're a dog who's seen things. Life, heartbreak, the Queen's laundry. You cough politely into your sleeve. This you think is your job now. Memorize your lines, don't fall off the stage. Try not to contract plague, and for the love of all things holy, learn to bark on cue. Mainstream fact. Elizabethan playhouses were built fast and cheap with open roofs and very little backstage. Props were limited. Lighting came from the sun, and most of the magic came from sheer force of imagination and apparently the occasional stage dog. And a fringe tidbit for you. Some surviving playbills reference actors by nickname alone, screeching John Fat Malk. And yes, Dog Ned, who reportedly made a living only playing canines and had a bark so convincing people crossed the street when they heard it. You adjust your costume. It's itchy and smells like boiled cabbage. Someone hands you a turnip to toss as a fake stage prop. Another actor is practicing a death scene in the corner, collapsing with such flourish that a stray rat scurries off in alarm. This is theater. Not the polished, velvet-curtained kind, but the dirt under your nails cry while you bark kind. The kind where the floor's sticky, the audience is terrifying, and the actors argue over who gets to be the mutt with the biggest laugh line. And somewhere in all that glorious mess you feel oddly proud. You're late for the costume fitting, and by costume fitting, of course, you mean a mad scramble through a pile of badly folded tunics, corsets, and garments that haven't been washed since Good Queen Bess still had baby teeth. You're in a dark, windowless corner of the playhouse, squinting through the half-light as you search for anything that doesn't smell like pickled herring and failure. Someone yells, "If I find one more lice in the lion cape, I swear by Saint Genesius," but they never finish the sentence, likely because they did in fact find one more lice. Today's performance has been moved up thanks to some noble patron with a flexible concept of time and a strong desire to see the one where the dog trips over the chamber pot. Which means everything is happening too fast. Your costume. It's an old monk's robe dyed a strange purplish russet with patches on the sleeves that were probably once someone's socks. You're playing a shepherd. Or a wandering astrologer. No one's entirely sure because the script's been rewritten 3 times since breakfast. All that matters is that you need to look convincing when you point at the moon and fall down a flight of wooden steps. The dog costume, on the other hand, is a work of chaotic genius. 2 parts wool, 1 part hairbrush, and several parts mystery fabric. It's passed from actor to actor like a cursed relic. Tobias is wearing it again, sulking in the corner while chewing on a fake bone that might also be a real bone. He growls when someone steps too close. "Channel your inner hound," the director mutters, fastening a tail with what looks suspiciously like a shoelace. This is art. Mainstream fact. Elizabethan costumes were often second-hand clothing from noble households. Once a dress or jerkin went out of fashion in court, it might end up patched and altered on stage. Actors cherished these cast-offs like treasure, not just for their beauty, but for how they could quickly signal wealth or class to an audience. But here's the fringe tidbit: some companies intentionally made their dog costumes so outlandish that it became a running joke. One record from 1595 mentions a costume stitched from horsehair and sea sponge that was banned because it made audiences laugh too hard and disrupted a tragedy. You hold your breath as a small, grumpy tailor tugs at your collar, muttering about symmetry and shoulder lines. "You look like a potato sack what learned to speak," she says cheerfully, then pins something sharp directly into your shoulder seam. You pretend not to notice. Pain is part of the aesthetic. Tobias whines and slinks across the room in full character, sniffing at the hems of robes, occasionally barking at nothing. It's actually impressive. The audience won't know it, but he's practiced this bit for weeks, refining the angle of each snuffle and perfecting the exact rhythm of his tail thumps. You help secure the chain collar around his neck, muttering a half-hearted good boy. He glares at you with the solemn dignity of a man whose art is not being respected. A shout rings out from the stairwell. 5 minutes, players. The pace ramps up. A frantic energy seizes the room like a lightning bolt in a wine barrel. Everyone is fixing fastening, adjusting. You see a woman in a shimmering teal gown with a fake beard strapped over her chin, flipping through a worn copy of her lines. A boy no older than 14 struggles with an oversized breastplate that clinks every time he breathes. You duck outside for a moment to catch your breath. The alley smells like smoke-spilled ale and something that might once have been fish. You can hear the crowd gathering on the other side of the curtain wall, laughter stomping feet, the occasional yelp of excitement. They're in a mood tonight. That's good. A lively audience is easier to win unless they throw things. You head back inside and take your place beside the dog. The two of you are on in the second scene. You kneel beside Tobias, who is now fully committed to his role and refuses to speak in anything but growls. "How do I look, you ask?" He pants once and drools. Close enough. The play begins. The audience erupts into applause as the curtain rises, or rather as the front actors just start talking since there's no actual curtain. You watch from the wings as the opening scene unfolds with surprising grace. The lead delivers his lines with conviction, the lady swoons with precision, and the boy in armor trips only twice. Then it's your turn. You enter stage left, holding the dog's rope leash, dragging Tobias behind you as he sniffs the air dramatically. You launch into your first line, something about moonlight and betrayal, and mid-sentence, Tobias spots the prop sausages laid out for the feast scene in Act 4. He lunges. You're yanked sideways across the stage like a sack of turnips, flailing to maintain composure as the audience shrieks with laughter. The sausages scatter. One lands in the lap of a nobleman in the front row who doesn't seem to mind. Tobias devours the rest with gusto, tail wagging like a windmill in a hurricane. You scramble to your feet, panting. "Alas, you say my beast is overcome with passion." The crowd roars. The scene somehow recovers. The chaos feels strangely intentional, like Shakespeare himself intended dogs to ruin dinner parties. You find your rhythm again. Tobias nails a dramatic whimper in the background, and by the time you exit, the crowd is already chanting, "Dog, dog, dog." You wait in the wings, breathless, sweaty, and barely able to believe what just happened. Someone hands you a mug of something warm and mildly terrifying. You drink it anyway. Historians still argue whether comedic animal roles were considered proper art or just crowd bait. The records are torn between praise and embarrassment. But what no one disputes is this: when done well, a dog on stage could steal a play. And your company. You're starting to suspect you might have just barked your way into legend. You lean against a support beam costume, itchy against your skin, and grin. Tomorrow you'll probably be sweeping rat droppings off the stage. But tonight, you're part of the show. After the show, the adrenaline fizzles out like the last glow of a tallow candle. You and the rest of the company spill back into the green room, which, contrary to its name, is neither green nor particularly roomy. It's more of a slanted wooden box that creaks when too many people exhale at once. You collapse onto a bench that might once have been a door, trying to decide whether the ache in your feet or the sausage stain on your doublet is the greater tragedy. Tobias peels off the dog costume with a level of solemnity usually reserved for knights removing armor. Bits of straw and fur cling to his shirt. He's glowing with satisfaction. "Did you see how they howled?" he says, clutching the fake bone like a trophy. That, my friend, was art. You nod, too tired to argue. Besides, he's right. The crowd did howl. They laughed so hard someone dropped their chicken leg into the pit. That kind of reaction can't be faked. Someone opens a tiny window for air, and a burst of London's finest summer stink wafts in yeasty, smoky, vaguely fish-adjacent. You all grimace in unison, which somehow feels like team bonding. As the others chatter, joke, and bicker about whose monologue got trampled by barking, you slip out the side door into the cool night. The playhouse alley is silent now, save for the faint rattle of a drunkard's cart and the occasional owl debating dinner. You lean against the wall and look up. The sky is smoky, scattered with stars like spilled flour. And for a moment you realize something: this is your life now. Not a temporary gig, not a silly phase. You're in it, dog barks, potato costumes, and all. Mainstream fact acting in Elizabethan England was a profession both celebrated and scorned. Popular among the masses, yes, but legally sketchy at times. In fact, actors without a noble patron could be arrested as masterless men lumped in with vagrants and troublemakers. Which is why your troupe proudly displays a faded parchment near the stage entrance, your license of patronage, signed by some baron whose name no one can remember, but whose signature keeps you out of jail. Mostly. Fringe tidbit. One rogue troupe in 1601 staged an entire production in the middle of a sheep market without permission. When authorities broke it up, the lead actor claimed he was possessed by the spirit of Puck and couldn't be held responsible. He was fined a single shilling and made to apologize to the sheep. You head back inside where the costume mistress is already folding tunics with the speed of someone who's done this too many times to count. She eyes the torn seam on your sleeve and sighs. Again, you offer a sheepish smile. Blame the dog. She mutters something unrepeatable and tosses you a needle and thread. You're meant to learn, after all. Everyone pulls their weight here, acting, mending, hauling props, scrubbing blood stains, both theatrical and otherwise. It's a bit like a monastery if monasteries involved more yelling and less celibacy. You stitch quietly while the others drift to their bunks, rough cots arranged around the perimeter of the room, each one stacked with mismatched blankets, boots, and the occasional questionable jar of unidentifiable salve. You overhear snippets of conversation. That noble with the feather hat fainted at the stabbing scene. Did not. Did so. Landed right in a pie. And if I don't get the ghost roll next week, I'm walking. Walking where you sleep here. There's something deeply comforting about the exhaustion in the room. You're all worn thin by the same thing, all slightly bruised in the same ways. It's a strange theatrical fraternity built not on trust or money, but on timing shared sweat and the hope that tomorrow's crowd laughs even harder. You lie back on your cot and stretch your sore arms. Your fingers smell faintly of grease paint and stale onions. You stare at the ceiling and let your mind drift. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan actors genuinely loved their work or simply endured it because there weren't many other options for someone with a flair for fake dying. Some claim they were proto-celebrities, others that they lived hand-to-mouth in the truest sense. The answer, you suspect, is yes to both. Your eyes flutter shut, but just as you're about to drift off, the door creaks open, and Kit, the youngest of the troop, barely 16 and still trying to grow a mustache, tiptoes in. He's clutching a parchment. New pages from the poet, he whispers. A collective groan rises from the bunks like a tide of ghosts. Now someone moans. They're for the next show. He rewrote the jail scene. Again. There's a new bit where someone howls. Guess who all eyes turn to Tobias, who without lifting his head mutters, "It better be a dignified howl." You grin in the dark. Tomorrow you'll rehearse, memorize, stumble, argue, adjust, and maybe if you're lucky, howl a little yourself. But for now, you sleep. The room quiets, save for the creak of timber and the occasional snore. Outside, the moon glows faintly behind a veil of coal smoke. Inside, a dog costume lies crumpled on the floor, dreaming perhaps of sausages. Morning comes not with a gentle sunrise, but with the unmistakable sound of someone retching near the privy bucket. You groan, roll over, and briefly consider pretending to be dead. Unfortunately, the floorboard digging into your rib cage has other plans. Kit is already up pacing the cramped room and reciting lines with the manic energy of someone who thinks practice makes perfect and hasn't yet realized it, mostly just makes exhaustion louder. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all, he mutters, stabbing at the air with a broom handle that's clearly trying its best to be a rapier. You sit up bleary-eyed, rubbing the dried stage paint from your jaw. Around you, the rest of the company stirs to life with all the grace of startled chickens. Tobias is missing a sock. The costume mistress is muttering curses at a lace collar that exploded in the wash. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a cracked mirror, eyes, puffy hair resembling a startled hedgehog, and an imprint of your own sleeve buttons across your cheek. Another glorious day, you mumble to no one in particular. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a communal hunk of brown bread and something that might once have been cheese. A rat eyes you jealously from the rafters. You eat fast. Then it's off to rehearsal, which takes place in the same space as the performance because renting more than one room is a dream for companies with patrons who actually remember your name. The sun filters through the thatch and dust, catching the floating particles of chalk flour and ambition. Today's rehearsal starts with blocking a fight scene, specifically the moment when your character accidentally mistakes a bush for a bandit and ends up wrestling it to the ground. The bush in this case is played by Peter, a seasoned actor who once did a full season as Hamlet's ghost, and now spends most of his time as foliage. More terror, the director calls from the back. "You're frightened, not annoyed. I am annoyed," Peter calls back. "This is my third day being a shrub." Mainstream fact Elizabethan theater troupes often reused actors in wildly different roles within a single week. One night you're a doomed prince, the next a very enthusiastic cabbage. There was no shame in it, just a dizzying amount of improvisation and costume changes. Someone forgets a cue. Someone else delivers their line with the enthusiasm of boiled oats. A sword prop shatters mid-swing, sending splinters across the stage. You narrowly avoid being skewered by a flying pommel and silently vow revenge against whichever apprentice was responsible for gluing it last. Breaks are taken on crates. Arguments blossom like mold. There's a full 15-minute sidebar debate about whether dogs in real life ever actually chase ghosts and whether your bark in the final act should sound more spectral. Tobias demonstrates 3 variations, ranging from distant thunder to startled pigeon. No one agrees on anything. You move on. The costume mistress arrives with a stack of mended garments, including your doublet now patched with a slightly different shade of russet. "It's rustic," she says. "Blame the dye pot." You thank her. She eyes you like she's trying to figure out how soon she'll need to mend it again. Fringe tidbit. Some Elizabethan actors stitched hidden pockets into their costumes to sneak food or trinkets on stage. One famously forgot a meat pie tucked in his tunic, only to have it slide out dramatically mid-monologue. The audience reportedly gave it a standing ovation. You run lines with Kit for a while, his youthful energy crashing against your steady fatigue, like waves on a very tired rock. He's got potential sharp instincts, strong voice, terrible sense of timing. But he listens. That's rare. "You ever think of quitting?" he asks between scenes. "Every time I miss a cue, you reply. But then someone claps, or laughs, or throws a plum, and suddenly I'm back in it." Historians still argue whether most actors of the time were driven by passion or necessity. Was it the art that pulled them on stage, or simply the fact that other jobs involved more manure and fewer applause breaks? Likely both. By mid-afternoon, the air in the playhouse is thick with heat and resentment. You run through the final scene 3 times, once with the ghost, once without, and once where the ghost was accidentally replaced by someone carrying a mop and an apologetic look. Rehearsal ends with the director throwing up his hands and declaring, "We'll fix it in the live show," a phrase that has never once proven true. You collapse backstage again, this time with less ceremony. Kit's still muttering lines. Peter the Shrub is eating an apple like he's trying to bite through time. You peel off your sweat-soaked tunic and replace it with one only marginally drier. Evening performance isn't for another few hours, but the quiet lull beforehand is precious time to nap. Drink water, maybe steal a glance at the poem some anonymous hand carved into the stage's edge long ago. It reads, "Speak loud, fall slow, and always face the crowd." It's become something of a motto. A pigeon coos from the rafters. Someone drops a goblet in the wings. Tobias walks by, still wearing half the dog ears. Thinking of adding a backflip, he says. "Too much." You raise an eyebrow. "Can you do a backflip?" "Not yet." He shrugs, strolling off. You exhale slowly. Another show waits. Another crowd. More laughter. More plum pits. But for now, a few minutes of quiet. You close your eyes and let the warmth of the day settle in your bones, trying not to think too hard about what you'll have to howl like tonight. The sun begins to slant low, casting long shadows through the warped shutters of the makeshift dressing room. The scent of sweat, grease paint, and desperation thickens as showtime creeps closer. You stand before the cracked mirror again, smearing your face with soot and egg yolk, muttering lines you've said so often they now sound like someone else's bedtime story. Tonight you're playing Sir Pompwell, a pompous noble who meets his end slipping on a misplaced onion and being mistaken for a ghost. Art, truly. But your real concern isn't Sir Pompwell. It's Tobias. And those dog ears. He's seated on an overturned bucket, solemnly chewing bread crust and adjusting his costume, a lumpy, vaguely canine affair made of old pelts dyed wool and, what you hope, is horsehair. The ears tilt askew like sad sails in the wind. Still thinking about the backflip, you ask him, half joking. He nods gravely. But I'll only do it if the audience is quiet during the fart monologue. Big if. Mainstream historical fact. Audience etiquette in Elizabethan theaters was not a thing. People cheered, jeered, threw fruit, heckled the actors, and occasionally fought each other in the aisles. You had to be louder, funnier, and faster than the crowd, or risk being upstaged by a dog barking in the distance or a merchant loudly haggling near the beer stall. The trumpet sounds once, twice. Places bellows the stage manager, a man with the patience of a saint and the voice of an angry badger. Everyone scatters like startled sheep. You take your position in the wings, peeking through a curtain with all the nervous excitement of someone about to run a marathon in a corset. The crowd is already a swirl of motion. A group of apprentices up front are wrestling over a meat pie. A woman in the gallery cackles at something no one else heard. In the back, a gentleman with an impressive mustache is attempting to balance an entire bottle of wine on his knee. The play begins. The opening lines go well. Kit delivers his first speech with all the gravitas of a priest announcing doomsday, which fits the tone surprisingly well. You enter to decent applause, someone even whistles and manage to trip only slightly on a discarded glove. And then comes the dog scene. Tobias, in full canine regalia, bounds onto stage with a howl that lands somewhere between enthusiastic and horrifying. The audience roars. Someone shouts, "Good boy." Another throws what appears to be a chicken bone. You try not to laugh. You really try. Tobias begins his big moment, a monologue, where the dog speaks to the ghost of its former master. It's absurd. It's overlong. It's also weirdly touching. He delivers it with total sincerity, tail wagging in earnest grief. And then, the backflip. He actually does it. Sort of. His legs lift, the ears flap like flags, and for a fleeting second you believe in miracles. Then he lands sideways with a thud that echoes through the theater like thunder in a chamber pot. The audience gasps. Tobias lies still for a beat, then gives a theatrical whimper and slowly rolls over. The crowd erupts. Laughter. Cheers. Someone tosses a coin. Fringe tidbit. Some actors made more money from tossed coins than actual wages. Theaters even hired pickpockets to retrieve coins from the stage after shows. It wasn't exactly noble, but then again, neither was pretending to be a ghost dog in a fake fur hat. The play continues. A mishap with a trapdoor sends Kit halfway through the floor, leading to an impromptu moment of him delivering lines while visibly stuck from the waist down. You and another actor improvise a dramatic rescue involving a rope, a broomstick, and several lines from a completely different play. No one minds. That's the thing about these performances. Chaos is part of the charm. The unexpected becomes the unforgettable. People don't come for perfect. They come for alive. Your final scene ends with a pratfall so elaborate it pulls a muscle in your lower back. You bow while pretending not to limp, grinning through gritted teeth as the applause washes over the stage like surf on sand. The curtain falls. Well, there is no curtain technically. Just a faded piece of linen that someone yanks sideways and prays won't tear. Backstage is chaos again. Actors slap each other's backs. Kit's hair is full of hay. Tobias is surrounded by admirers, demanding he demonstrate the flop again. You flew, someone tells him. I bounced, he corrects modestly. You peel off your costume a sigh in relief. Your doublet is soaked, your knees ache, and you've definitely inhaled a moth from that fake wig during your soliloquy. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan performances were better appreciated in the chaos of their original context or idealized through the rose-tinted lens of modern reverence. Was Shakespeare truly a genius for the ages, or just a very lucky man with a knack for dirty jokes and decent pacing? You lean toward both. You and Kit find a quiet spot behind a stack of barrels. The stars peek through the holes in the thatch above, and the hum of the crowd dispersing fades like distant bees. Someone starts to play a lute nearby. It's out of tune, of course. I think we did all right, Kit says. You nod. No one died. And the dog scene worked. Miraculously. You think it's worth fighting over. You glance at him. What? The dog roll, I mean. It's ridiculous, but it kind of makes the show. You consider it. Let him have it, you say finally. He earned it. And we don't need two actors doing flips on a splintery stage. Kit laughs. Fair. You rise, stretching your sore back, and catch a glimpse of Tobias reenacting his landing for an enthusiastic group of drunkards. He howls. They cheer. Someone hands him a turkey leg. You shake your head. Heaven help us if they ask him to play Hamlet next. The next morning arrives with all the subtlety of a falling wardrobe. You're woken not by birdsong, but by the sound of Tobias attempting to reenact his now infamous backflip in the courtyard, landing squarely on what you hope was a sack of cabbages. Groans applause a faint, "I'm fine," and then the stomping of the landlord yelling something about cracked flagstones. You bury your head under your blanket trying to pretend the theater doesn't exist, but your back reminds you otherwise. Every muscle aches in a distinctly Elizabethan way. No beds, no mattresses, just rough linen and the faint hope of sleep. Eventually you rise, splash some water on your face from a barrel that smells faintly of fish, and wrap yourself in the closest thing you own to a clean tunic. Kit appears in the doorway, half-dressed, half asleep, wholly unimpressed. They want to rework the second act, he says flatly. Oh no. Oh yes. Mainstream historical fact. Elizabethan plays weren't fixed scripts, at least not in the modern sense. Troupes often adapted scenes on the fly, responding to audience reactions, available actors, or practical challenges, like someone losing a prop or forgetting their lines. Scripts were fluid, collaborative, and sometimes downright chaotic. Entire subplots could disappear between matinee and evening performance. The landlord has assembled the troupe for a creative discussion, which in your experience means a loosely veiled shouting match, followed by someone storming out and someone else crying into a bread roll. Everyone gathers around a battered table in the tap room, the centerpiece of which is a single candle, flickering dramatically, like it knows something you don't. Tobias, surprisingly, is the first to speak. "I think the dog should have a name," he announces. "It makes him more real, more sympathetic." Kit raises an eyebrow. "He's already got a monologue, 3 entrances, and now you want character development, I'm just saying," Tobias replies. "What if the dog has a tragic backstory like, he was once a royal hound, cast out, living on crumbs and hope. Someone snorts. Someone else mutters, 'Hope died,' when the prop trunk caught fire. You sip weak ale and listen." The debate rolls on. One actor proposes a subplot involving the dog being cursed by a vengeful wizard. Another suggests the dog fall in love with a swan. A third recommends cutting the dog entirely and replacing it with a talking goose, which she insists she can imitate convincingly. This leads to the table's first real shouting match of the day. You watch from the sidelines, arms folded, as the argument spirals from artistic choices into personal grievances. "You always forget your lines," someone accuses. "At least I don't sweat through my costume like a cheese under siege." Fringe tidbit. Theater rivalries in the Elizabethan era were notoriously vicious. Actors accused each other of sabotage, line stealing, and even witchcraft. There are records of physical fights backstage and entire performances derailed by grudges. One actor allegedly released a live ferret on stage during a rival's monologue. Eventually, the director, a thin man who looks perpetually haunted by unpaid debts and bad lighting calls for order. "We're keeping the dog," he says, but no tragic backstory, no goose, no wizard. Tobias pouts. The goose impersonator slinks off. You sigh in relief. Then the director turns to you. "We want you to play the moon." You blink. "Come again." "The moon," he repeats. In the final scene, the dog howls at it. "We thought maybe you hold a silver-painted plate and just sort of hover." You stare at him. Hover. He nods solemnly. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan special effects were innovative or completely deranged. Stagecraft included trapdoors, thunder sheets, pig bladders filled with fake blood, and actors lowered by rope pulleys to simulate flight, sometimes successfully, sometimes resulting in concussions. You agree to play the moon because saying no leads to more arguing, and you've already seen one actor threaten another with a hurdy-gurdy this morning. You'd rather not witness round 2. The rest of the day is spent rehearsing the revised ending. Tobias howls. You hold the plate. It's less moonlight and more awkward waiter presenting a cheese platter, but no one seems to mind. The new scene ends with the dog collapsing dramatically as you shimmer in place, trying not to sneeze from the silver dust flaking off your face. After rehearsal, you retreat to the riverbank with Kit, both of you trying to avoid further artistic brainstorms. Remember when we just did comedies about drunk bakers and angry fishmongers, Kit muses. Simple times, you agree. Before the age of emotional support dogs and celestial dinnerware, you skip a stone across the water, it sinks immediately. That's a metaphor, Kit says. You lie back on the grass, letting the sun warm your eyelids. There's something absurdly peaceful about this life. Even with the constant hunger, the political tension, the frequent threats of plague, and the ongoing danger of being replaced by a goose. You perform for strangers who laugh, cheer, and occasionally hurl poultry. You live in borrowed rooms, sleep on borrowed straw, and wear borrowed shoes that never fit quite right. And yet somehow, it works. The dog has his backflip. You have your moon. Kit has his perfectly timed eyebrow raises. Together you build something ephemeral and ridiculous and strangely beautiful. You'd think playing the moon would be the weirdest part of your week, but no. That honor goes to the town crier getting into a shouting match with a marionette performer on the high street. Something about noise territory. You're still not sure who won. The next few days pass in a kind of rehearsed delirium. The dog scenes have become the centerpiece of the show, drawing bigger crowds than ever, people jostling for standing room just to watch Tobias bark, growl, and occasionally chase a stick off stage. It is objectively ridiculous. And yet, it works. The audience loves it. The tavern buzzes each night with praise. Someone starts calling it the dog play, which Kit pretends to hate, but secretly encourages by correcting them with tragedy, featuring canine undertones. You start leaning into the absurdity, adjusting your moon plate performance with a bit more flair, hovering, walking slowly in a circle, raising the plate high like a divine cheese, and even humming a note for dramatic effect. Tobias begins improvising. He adds a limp in one scene. In another, he scratches behind his ear with his foot. One night, he performs the entire final howl while maintaining full eye contact with a man in the front row who appears both terrified and emotionally moved. Mainstream historical fact, Elizabethan theater was known for embracing improvisation. While the backbone of a play might be scripted, actors frequently added flourishes, comedic asides, or entire speeches, especially if the crowd seemed distracted or unruly. Performers had to be quick-witted, adaptable, and occasionally fearless in the face of cabbage. But the real trouble begins with the dog's costume. It starts as a simple brown tunic with floppy ears. Then someone sews on a tail. Then someone else decides the tail needs bells. Then Kit finds a scrap of fur at the market and convinces Tobias to glue it to his chin for emotional depth. Now the costume smells like a fox corpse and jingles every time he moves. The audience loves it. The actors do not. You overhear a whispered conversation one afternoon behind the curtain. Why does he get all the attention? Because he has fur glued to his face. That's why. I trained for 5 years at the Royal Poetic Society, and now I'm being upstaged by a howling man in bells. Should we poison him? A pause. No, that's too far. But maybe fleas. The jealousy grows louder with each rehearsal. Arguments break out over blocking. One actor accuses Tobias of stealing the scene with his nose, which is possibly the most Elizabethan insult you've ever heard. You try to stay neutral. You're the moon, after all. You rise, you shine. You try not to get involved in terrestrial drama. But it's hard when everyone's muttering backstage. He sniffs the Queen's feet in Act 2 like he's in love with them. He is in love with them. That's not the point. Fringe tidbit. There's evidence suggesting that Elizabethan audiences often latched onto specific performances or characters with wild devotion similar to modern fandoms. Certain actors had groupies who followed them from venue to venue, throwing flowers, gifts, and in one documented case, a dead squirrel dressed as Cupid. And just like that, the dog becomes the play. Flyers start featuring his likeness, a crude woodcut of Tobias mid-howl, surrounded by decorative stars. The playwright, a deeply tired man named Edmund, who writes in the back room between flagons of cider, changes the title to The Howling Heart. The original lead storms out. Kit rewrites entire scenes to accommodate the dog's emotional journey. You are promoted from moon to narrator. Now you open the play with a poetic monologue while draped in silver and asked to glide across the stage like an evening tide. It's mostly a lot of floating and trying not to trip. The tipping point comes during a performance for a visiting nobleman, some cousin to someone vaguely important. The courtyard is packed, torches flickering, wine flowing. Tobias gives the performance of a lifetime. He howls, he whimpers, he paws at the ground. He dies dramatically under the glow of your moon plate. The nobleman wipes a tear. That dog, he says, voice trembling. That dog has known loss. The next day, Tobias receives a personal invitation to perform at a private banquet, and that's when everything snaps. The actor who played the jilted lover quits mid-scene yelling, "I will not be emotionally cuckolded by a four-legged mime." Someone kicks over the props trunk. The tail is stolen. You later find it nailed to the tavern door with a note that reads, "No gods, no masters, no mutts." Tobias, to his credit, tries to keep the peace. He offers to share his lines. He stops licking people during intermission. He gives a heartfelt speech about how the dog is a metaphor, not a threat. No one listens. Tensions flare again during rehearsal. Kit suggests a scene where the dog is revealed to be a cursed prince. Someone throws a tankard. You duck just in time. Historians still argue whether these actor rivalries were driven by ego ambition or sheer boredom. The lack of institutional support, the grind of daily performances, and the fierce competition for patronage made Elizabethan troops both tight-knit and combustible. They were family, but the kind that frequently considered fratricide. Eventually, a vote is taken. The dog is written out, not killed, retired. Sent to a farm in Act 3 to live out his days chasing chickens and pondering love lost. The audience is confused, disappointed. The next performance is polite but flat. Tobias sits backstage, silent, the bells from his tail now strung around his wrist like a ghost of better days. You say nothing. You were the moon. Now you're just a man in silver floating through the aftermath. The days that follow feel like the tail end of a thunderstorm, quiet, but not peaceful. You move through rehearsals with the dazed rhythm of someone recovering from a very specific type of theatrical heartbreak. No one speaks of Tobias's final howl, or the nobleman's tear, or the dogtail nailed to the door. Instead, the troupe shifts into a new version of itself, quieter, leaner, less jingly. The show goes on. Of course it does. But something's missing. You still perform. You still lift your silver plate and glide across the stage, though it's more metaphorical moon now than actual celestial presence. You narrate with poetic sincerity. You deliver your lines. The crowd claps, but it's all a little hollow, like watching a familiar dream fade into the fog of morning. Tobias, meanwhile, has thrown himself into backstage duties. He runs lines with the new lead, sharpens props and patches costumes with a seriousness usually reserved for royal decrees. He even hums while sweeping. It would be heartwarming if it weren't so tragic. Kit says nothing, but you catch him once watching Tobias with a look that's somewhere between guilt and fondness, like a parent watching their child voluntarily retire from interpretive bark dancing. Mainstream historical fact. Roles in Elizabethan theater weren't fixed. An actor might play a tragic prince one week and a dancing bear the next. The repertory system demanded versatility and popular plays rotated quickly based on audience demand. It wasn't unusual for performances to be rewritten, revived, or outright cannibalized to suit shifting tastes. Fame could be fleeting, and dogs apparently even more so. You try to reconnect with your fellow actors, but the group feels fractured. The jilted lover returns, but with conditions: no animal roles, no improvisation, and absolutely no more howling. The goose impersonator is promoted to comic relief. Someone suggests reviving the cursed wizard subplot, but it's met with silence. One afternoon, Kit calls a meeting. He stands on a stool in the courtyard, arms crossed, hair, doing that windswept poet thing it always does when he's serious. "We've lost the plot," he says plainly. No one argues. He gestures to Tobias. The dog was never the problem. The problem was us treating this like it wasn't supposed to be fun. You all glance at each other, caught somewhere between embarrassment and hope. Then Kit holds up a new script, thin, hastily bound with twine. "We're starting fresh." A murmur ripples through the group. "It's short," he continues. "It's ridiculous, but it's got heart." He hands it to you first. You flip through the pages. Act 1, A Cheese Too Far. Yes, it's a comedy about a cursed cheese wheel. You blink. "You wrote this last night," Kit shrugs. "I couldn't sleep." Fringe tidbit. Many Elizabethan plays, especially comedies, were written in single-night frenzies. With tight deadlines and hungry audiences, playwrights often recycled plots, characters, or entire pages. Theaters were engines of content before content even knew it needed an engine. What mattered most wasn't polish, it was energy. Rehearsals begin that afternoon. The mood shifts. Laughter returns. Not the polished performative kind, but the messy snorting sort that makes you nearly drop your prop dagger. Tobias plays the cheese, of course. He's wrapped in yellow felt and wears a solemn expression as if burdened by the knowledge of all dairy. You play a village mayor allergic to truth. Kit plays a bard who can only rhyme in vegetables. It's absurd, and it's perfect. The tavern buzzes with excitement. Flyers are slapped onto posts. People ask, "Is the cheese a metaphor?" You say yes. You don't know what for, but you say yes. Opening night arrives. The courtyard is packed. Even the nobleman returns, though he brings a small dog and sits in the back guarded. The performance begins. Tobias rolls on stage with profound gravity, delivers his opening line. "I have lived many lives, all of them pasteurized, and the audience howls. You've never heard laughter like this. Not from this play, not from this troupe. People double over. They cheer. A child throws a radish in approval." Historians still argue whether Elizabethan comedies were more popular than tragedies. Some records suggest that audiences leaned toward laughter, preferring slapstick cross-dressing disguises and fart jokes to drawn-out soliloquies. Others argue the genre didn't matter. What mattered was the escape, the shared breath, the temporary magic. By the time the curtain call comes, you're exhausted, elated, sticky from costume glue and radish juice. The crowd roars. Someone shouts, "Long live the cheese!" Tobias bows deeply. Kit pretends to eat his loot. You raise your arms like a silver moon over a yellow wheel of destiny. Backstage, the energy hums. "We did it," Tobias says softly. "We survived," Kit replies. "Barely," you add, glancing at the bruised tomato still stuck to your boot. But you're grinning. The troupe buzzes into the night, scattering into taverns, alleyways, and secret rooftops. You sit on a low wall with Kit and Tobias, sharing a flask of something warm and questionably legal. The moon is real this time. High above, full, steady. You raise your cup to it, to the dog, to the cheese, to the part of theater that makes no sense at all. Then you sit back, letting the breeze catch your hair, the laughter drift into the distance, and your own breath slow into something like contentment. Because here now, in this strange little slice of Elizabethan chaos, everything feels right. The days that follow are the kind that slip past like silk through fingers, quiet, weirdly warm, and laced with the smell of hay ink and roasted chestnuts from the nearby market. You and the troupe settle into your new rhythm, and a cheese too far quickly becomes the unlikely darling of Southwark. People come for the cheese stay for the villain who speaks only in iambic poultry metaphors and leave giggling into their sleeves. You get asked for autographs, now usually smudged on tavern napkins or someone's hat. Tobias, still wrapped in his cheese, felt most days receives love letters that smell suspiciously of cheddar. Kit has begun composing a sequel tentatively titled The Gruyere Ultimatum. You perform daily, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times if the weather's nice, and the audience drinks heavily. Your knees ache. Your voice rasps. Your props fall apart at least once per show. But you can't remember a time you felt more alive. Mainstream historical fact. Elizabethan actors performed often, sometimes 6 different plays in a single week, with no formal rehearsal time and scripts that weren't fully distributed. You were expected to memorize your parts quickly and improvise if someone forgot a line or if a chicken wandered onto the stage. The theater was many things, but it was never predictable. There's talk of bringing the show across the river. A noblewoman with an interest in vulgar common amusements has extended an invitation to her private garden stage. She describes the play as delightfully deranged and promises wine and possibly a swan. You all pretend not to be impressed, but the mention of a swan does get Kit sketching potential choreography for Act 3, Dairy versus Waterfowl. The night before the noblewoman's performance, the troupe gathers in the courtyard for a run-through. It's late, the stars are sharp, and someone's brought a jug of plum wine. The script is abandoned halfway through in favor of free-form improv, during which Tobias mid-monologue is challenged to a dance-off by the goose impersonator. You're not sure who wins, but the entire event ends with Tobias covered in feathers and someone's shoe lodged in the set wall. You fall asleep that night, half dressed and half laughing, but of course it can't all be cheese and feather fights forever. The next afternoon, as you prepare for the noblewoman's garden performance, you're approached by a very serious man in a very serious ruff. He carries a scroll and a sneer. He's with the Revels office. You've been reported. Fringe tidbit. The master of the Revels was essentially the drama police responsible for licensing, plays censoring lines, and occasionally shutting down performances deemed inappropriate, seditious, or too sexy. You could get away with quite a bit if you knew who to bribe, but if someone really wanted to see you silenced, it didn't take much. A single complaint could sink a whole production. The complaint, it turns out, is about blasphemy, cheese-based irreverence, and suggestive dairy metaphors. Kit looks like he might faint from pride. Tobias, wrapped in his usual felt, just mutters, "I knew the curd jokes would catch up to us." The Revels officer gives you a choice: either remove the offending material and apply for a new license, or cease performance entirely until reviewed, which could take weeks, months, maybe forever. The troupe is silent. You all glance at the script. Then at the noblewoman's invitation written in lilac ink and sealed with a tiny edible rose, then at each other. Kit clears his throat. We change the cheese. You blink. What? We make it goat cheese. Less sensual, more pastoral. Tobias perks up. I do a great goat bleat. You nod slowly. What about the monologue about lactation and the divine feminine? Make it about wool. Kit replies instantly. Historians still argue whether censorship helped or hindered Elizabethan creativity. On one hand, it limited what could be said directly. On the other, it forced writers to master innuendo allegory and the fine art of plausible deniability. Some of the sharpest commentary of the era came hidden behind jokes about sausages or apparently dairy products. The noblewoman's garden is the sort of place where bees sound expensive and even the statues seem to gossip. You're given a real dressing room. There are cushions. The stage has actual curtains. You nearly cry. The crowd is smaller, more refined. But they howl at the goat jokes. They weep, yes, weep, during Act Two's existential crisis about curdled identity. They cheer when the bard finds redemption through root vegetables. And at the end, when Tobias the goat cheese gives his final pained bleat of farewell, the noblewoman stands and tosses her handkerchief onto the stage. It smells, faintly, of brie. Backstage, you collapse. You're surrounded by velvet drapes and cushions stuffed with probably illegal feathers. Someone hands you a peach. You eat it whole. Tobias lies sprawled on the floor, cheese tunic askew, face flushed with joy. We did it, he whispers. Kit nods. And no one got arrested. You sigh. We're legends. Then a voice from the corridor, you're needed in the orchard. You all blink. The lady wishes a private encore. Of course she does. You rise, knees groaning, and make your way outside where torches line the path, and the scent of roasted figs lingers in the air. The noblewoman sits beneath a willow tree surrounded by her entourage. She doesn't ask for your names. She doesn't compliment the acting. Instead, she says, "What's next?" And Kit, without missing a beat, replies, "We're thinking a tragedy." You all groan. She claps her hands. Delightful. Bring me sorrow tomorrow. The fig trees rustle in agreement. And once again, your life takes a turn. Offstage, improvised, maybe a little mad. But isn't that what theater's always been? The noblewoman's promise of sorrow tomorrow isn't just idle flattery. She sends her footman the next morning with a satchel of coins, a note written on lavender-scented parchment, and a bottle of plum wine sealed with wax in the shape of a skull. A message, you suppose. She wants tragedy. Real, weeping into your sleeves, curse the gods tragedy. You gather in the courtyard that afternoon, the troupe clutching their breakfast pies and trying not to look terrified. So, who dies? Someone asks. Kit, already scribbling in his notebook, answers without looking up. Everyone. Mainstream historical fact. Elizabethan tragedies were blood-soaked affairs. On average, a tragedy could rack up 5 to 10 on-stage deaths, with off-stage murders, suicides, and poisonings pushing the number even higher. Audiences didn't just tolerate it, they expected it. If the final scene didn't have at least one noble corpse, people asked for their money back. Tobias raises a hand. "Can I still be cheese?" No, Kit replies. "Now you're a haunted loaf of bread." The troupe groans, but you're already smiling. The new script, titled The Last Crumb, unfolds quickly. It's loosely based on a Greek myth no one remembers, and possibly a cheese wheel that murdered a village in a dream Kit once had. It opens with a monologue delivered by a widowed baker played by you naturally and ends with an apocalyptic flood of rye. You start rehearsals in the stable mostly because it's the only quiet space available that doesn't smell like old onions or tavern broth. Tobias hurls himself into his haunted bread roll with terrifying sincerity. Kit plays a blind prophet who only speaks in pastry puns. The goose impersonator becomes the angel of gluten. It is, to put it gently, completely unhinged. And yet it works. Fringe tidbit. While tragedies were considered more noble, Elizabethan audiences often mixed genres in a single show. A tragedy might feature a drunken porter midway through a regicide or a death scene immediately followed by a fart joke. The modern term tragicomedy doesn't quite capture the chaos of those scripts. The Elizabethans didn't believe in genres. They believed in keeping the crowd awake. The noblewoman's private garden fills again. This time the air is heavy with honeysuckle and anticipation. People whisper behind fans. A man in a powdered wig claims he's emotionally prepared for devastation. The show begins. You step onto the stage draped in tattered gray, a bread paddle slung over your shoulder like a weapon of sorrow. The first lines fall from your lips like raindrops. I need, therefore I am. The crowd gasps. A woman sobs openly into her gloves. The angel of gluten descends from a ladder. The haunted bread sings a lullaby about mold. By the time you reach the final scene, standing knee-deep in shredded paper, meant to symbolize flooding grain, the audience is wrecked. One man clutches his chest. A child whispers, "Is the loaf free now?" You deliver the final line, the lights dim, and silence hangs. Then applause erupts, louder than ever. Kit bows with a dramatic flourish. Tobias weeps. The noblewoman waves a silk scarf embroidered with a broken baguette. Backstage, you collapse again. But this time, it's the satisfied kind of collapse. The kind that comes after birthing something utterly absurd and wholly loved. Kit hands you a small piece of parchment. It's a review. Handwritten. From the noblewoman. It reads simply, "Delicious. Do more." You groan. But the troupe is already whispering about The Crumb Awakens, a sequel involving sourdough monks and the prophecy of butter. Later that night, sprawled on a hay bale with a flagon of cider and a bruised knee, you catch Kit staring at the moon. "She's right, you know," he murmurs. "This is better than real theater." You raise an eyebrow. "Better than serious theater." He shrugs. Serious theater never let Tobias be a haunted loaf. You laugh until your ribs ache. Historians still argue whether comedy or tragedy had the greater cultural impact in the Elizabethan era. Some believe tragedy elevated the moral and intellectual discourse, while others claim that laughter built more lasting communal memory. In truth, both fed the same hungry public people, desperate for stories that reflected their chaos, soothed their fears, and gave them something to talk about over pints of weak ale. A week later, you're back at the public playhouse. The garden shows are lovely, but this rickety stage, the pigeons watching from above the audience pressed in close and loud, is home. You perform both A Cheese Too Far and The Last Crumb in repertory now alternating, depending on the weather, the mood, and the general dairy sentiment of the crowd. You've stopped worrying about who plays what. Some days the bread is also the narrator. Other days the cheese and the goat fall in love. You lose track of the number of alternate endings, and somehow it never gets old. You even start getting letters from other troupes. One in Bristol wants to stage a version called The Stilton Prophecies. Another in York proposes a cross-bakery dramatic universe. You shake your head. What have we done, you ask Kit. Built an empire, he replies. Tobias nods solemnly. Cheese will outlive us all. And as you sip something warm and questionable under the stars, with laughter echoing from the courtyard and your boots still dusted with flour, you realize something. You used to chase the moon on stage. Now you just carry it with you. In every joke, every howl, every blessed loaf. Morning fog curls along the Thames like a tired cat, and you trudge across damp cobblestones with your boots squelching slightly. It's back to the public theater today, the Rose specifically, and the whole troupe is already murmuring about it. Not because you haven't played here before, but because The Crumb Awakens is making its official debut. Yes, they actually went through with it. You sip your watered ale and try to rehearse your lines in your head, something about sourdough prophecy and the butter chalice. Kit wrote the script in a single sleepless night, fueled by mutton pie and petty revenge after a heckler insulted his handwriting. Mainstream historical fact, Elizabethan playwrights often wrote under extreme time pressure. With shows rotating rapidly and fresh material always in demand, writers like Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Dekker cranked out plays in days or weeks, not months. They wrote fast, revised minimally, and counted on actors to fill in emotional gaps with sheer force of lung. Today you're playing a disgraced former baker-turned-oracle, haunted by visions of burnt crust and cursed pastry. Your costume smells faintly of ash and cinnamon. Tobias is the butter chalice. No one knows what that means yet. Possibly not even Tobias. But the audience. They're already lining up. A boy wearing a homemade cheese mask chants lines from The Last Crumb at passing fishmongers. A pair of women argue over whether the goat was an allegory. Someone hands you a parchment scroll containing fan art. It's disturbing. As you duck backstage, you notice a small addition to the props table, a loaf of real sourdough wrapped in velvet and wearing a crown. You're not actually using that on stage, are you, you ask? Kit shrugs. It's method. The crowd roars as the show begins. You step on stage to thunderous applause and immediately trip on your own robe. The audience laughs. You rise dramatically, brush yourself off, and declare, "I have risen like the bread." They laugh harder. It's chaos. It's perfect. Tobias, wearing what appears to be butter-dipped armor, glides onto the stage on a wheeled crate. "I am the spread foretold," he bellows. You don't know whether to applaud or cry. A rogue pigeon lands on a beam above you as if curious how this will end. The play's climax involves a dramatic confrontation between a cult of crouton monks and a resurrected pastry god made entirely of raisins. You deliver your lines with shaking hands, not from nerves, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Fringe tidbit. While Shakespearean theater was celebrated for lofty language and complex plots, it was also wildly irreverent. Audiences cheered for bodily humor, random animal appearances, and even impromptu actor ad-libs. A goat on stage wasn't unusual. A puppet show inside a serious drama, completely normal. Theater in the 1590s was as much about surprise as about substance. The crowd eats it up. By curtain call, they're standing. Someone throws a bread roll on stage like a flower offering. Kit catches it, bites into it, and promptly gags. "Stale," he says gravely, and the audience explodes with laughter again. Backstage, the celebration begins immediately. Someone brings cider. Someone else brings cheese, not metaphorical, but actual cheese. Tobias insists on cutting it with a dagger he's dubbed the butter blade. You're all punch-drunk with adrenaline and praise, lounging on crates and empty costume trunks, listening to the crowd filter out, still quoting lines. You think of your first day with the troupe, nervous, half-shaved, holding a tunic that didn't fit. You think of the first joke you forgot the first time someone threw an onion at you. And now, there's fan art. There's applause. There's a child asking Kit if haunted bread is real. You ask yourself a question: is this success? Historians still argue whether Elizabethan actors were celebrated public figures or merely tolerated entertainers. Some were beloved by nobles and courted by monarchs. Others were treated as vagabonds, forced to wear badges and banned from city centers. Reputation swung wildly like stage trapdoors, one moment hero, the next heckled pariah. In truth, most were somewhere in between, adored by the crowd, forgotten by history. Later that night, you walk along the riverbank. The fog's rolled back a bit. The moonlight shines off the water in that way that makes even eel carts look poetic. You can still hear faint echoes from the theater, a cheer, a laugh, the slap of boots on wooden boards. You find yourself humming. It's a tune from the show, of course, something ridiculous about rye vengeance and bakery redemption. But still it's stuck. Like it means something. Like it always did. You spot a boy running ahead of his mother, swinging a wooden spoon like a sword. "Look, I'm the bread prophet," he cries. "You can't help it." You grin. As you round the corner toward the actor's lodgings, Tobias leans out a window above you and tosses down a cloth bundle. "What's this you call up?" He grins. "New script. Revenge of the Crumbs. You're gonna love it." You sigh. You're probably going to perform as a baguette possessed by ancestral guilt. And yet, you already love it. The next day arrives like a whispered apology, soft light filtering through old shutters, the smell of damp straw and breakfast porridge wafting from someone's fire below. You wake sore, full of bread dreams and curtain call echoes. Tobias is already up, hunched over a wooden desk quill, twitching like a nervous squirrel. He's sketching costume revisions for Revenge of the Crumbs. I'm thinking, full bread armor, he says without looking up. Crust pauldrons, rye greaves. You blink slowly. And who's wearing that? He shrugs. You probably. Outside, London stirs. Fishmongers shout half-heartedly. A cartwheel clatters on cobblestone. Somewhere a child drops a bucket and blames a ghost. You stretch pull on yesterday's breeches and head downstairs in search of something edible that isn't theater-related. You're almost successful until the innkeeper cheerfully offers you a crumb cake, a new breakfast item inspired by the show. It's just bread pudding. You eat it anyway. Later, you wander toward the rows for rehearsal, expecting a typical morning of line mumbling and prop misplacement. But today, something's off. A small crowd has gathered outside, murmuring and pointing. On the door, a fresh proclamation has been nailed. Big, bold letters, "By order of the mayor. No dogs on stage." There it is. The ripple effect. Mainstream historical fact. By the early 1600s, London's city officials began to regulate the public theaters, more heavily worried about unruly crowds, immoral performances, and, yes, animals on stage. Dogs, bears, monkeys, and even horses had made appearances in plays, sometimes to thunderous applause, sometimes to chaos. Theaters could be fined or shut down for stepping too far out of line. Tobias reads, "It frowns, then brightens." Well, it doesn't say anything about goats. You groan. Kit, arriving moments later with ink-stained fingers and a loot case, reads the notice and cackles. "We've done it," he declares, arms outstretched. "We've broken the law. With bread." Your director, Mistress Fletcher, is less amused. She orders an emergency meeting inside. You sit in a circle backstage, half the cast 3 crates, and someone's grandmother who's brought pickled egg for strength. Fletcher paces. "We are in a position now," she says, "where audiences love the crumb, adore the crumb. But officials, not so much." She glares at Tobias. "You bit the sheriff's hat last week." In character, he says, "Deadpan." Fletcher sighs deeply. "We're walking a knife's edge here," she says. "We either tone it down or we make it so spectacular they can't close us. Bigger crowds, bigger laughs, nobles even. Someone important in the audience that could protect us. Fringe tidbit. It wasn't uncommon for acting troupes to curry favor with nobles or even the monarchy to gain protection. Shakespeare's own troupe became the King's Men after James the Thon took the throne, granting them royal patronage and shielding them from bans. A noble stamp of approval could turn theater rabble into cultural treasure. So Kit says we just need a noble to like bread. Or Tobias whispers we become nobles. Everyone stares. He grins. Think about it. You don't. Instead, you rehearse, and rehearse, and rehearse. A new scene is added where a crumb seer has visions of future breakfast menus. Another where the butter chalice sings a mournful ballad about toast. You weep for the lost bagel of Atlantis. It's nonsense. It's magic. And it's working. The buzz grows. You hear whispers at the pub, at the fish market, at the tailor's. People asking when the next show is. Asking if the bread will return. Someone's painted crumb rises on a city wall in ochre, letters 5 feet high. Then one morning, Fletcher bursts into the rehearsal room with a paper clutched to her chest like it's made of gold. "We have a booking," she gasps. "At the Globe." You nearly drop your prop spoon. The Globe is the jewel of the London theater scene. Larger crowds, nobler audiences, more risk, more reward. Kit faints dramatically into a trunk of costumes. Tobias lifts him back up, muttering, "If we're doing the Globe, I want glitter." Bread glitter, someone suggests. Obviously. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan actors saw rival theaters as friendly competition or bitter enemies. Some troupes traded talent and even shared stages. Others engaged in sabotage, stealing plays, mocking competitors, or bribing hecklers. The Globe was famously associated with Shakespeare and Lord Chamberlain's men, but even they had to contend with envious rivals and flaky nobles. Your troupe begins frantic preparation, new costumes, bigger props, flashier set pieces. You're rehearsing full scenes by candlelight, dreaming in sourdough metaphors, and somehow developing biceps from hauling stage crates. And yet, despite the exhaustion, you feel it momentum, that strange, exhilarating sense that something you helped create is catching fire in the world. One afternoon, Fletcher calls you over. Her voice is low. Word is a courtier may be attending. One of the Queen's cousins. Don't ask which. You blink. If he likes what he sees, she says everything changes. No pressure. That night, you walk home slowly. London glimmers with oil lamps and reflected moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, someone sings a dirty limerick about a monk and a meat pie. You're too tired to laugh. You pause by the river bank, watch the dark water ripple. There was a time months ago, maybe, when all you wanted was a part. Any part. Now you're leading a play so bizarre it got legislation passed. You whisper a line from The Crumb Awakens to yourself. Let ye not fear the oven, for all rise in time. And weirdly, it makes you feel brave. The day of the Globe performance dawns with indecent cheer, clear skies, brisk breeze, and the sound of a street vendor shouting something about eels on sticks. You wake before the sun heart thudding like someone's beating a drum under your ribs. The company is already at the theater by breakfast. Kit is attempting to iron his doublet with a heated pewter plate. Tobias is applying flour to his face with a paintbrush. Mistress Fletcher is sitting in a corner whispering a prayer to a patron saint you're fairly certain she made up. The Globe itself is magnificent. Circular timber framed and open to the sky, it holds up to 3,000 people when full, and today it will be full. Word of the Crumb uprising has spread like wildfire. People queue outside as early as dawn, some clutching bread loaves as props. Someone even brought jam. As the actors prepare, you wander backstage. The boards creak softly. Above rigging ropes sway in the morning breeze. There's a stillness to it, a kind of theatrical calm before the thunder. You take a deep breath and look out through the curtain. It's already half full. By noon, it's packed. Mainstream historical fact. The Globe's groundlings, those who stood in the pit for a penny, were known for their rowdy energy. They heckled, cheered, booed, and threw apples if displeased. Meanwhile, the upper galleries catered to wealthier patrons and visiting nobles. Performances had to cater to both a delicate juggling act of fart jokes and poetic soliloquies. The play begins. Act 1, Ye Old Crumb awakens. You step on stage to thunderous laughter. You deliver your first lines, noble, weary, possibly breadcrumb covered, and the crowd is with you instantly. Kit strums his lute like a man possessed. Tobias performs a full cartwheel while pretending to be a yeasted oracle. The nobles in the gallery watch with polite interest. The groundlings howl with delight when the bread oracle slaps the villain with a baguette. Scene after scene unfolds with surprising grace. The bread rebellion, the prophecy of the sourdough moon, the tragic fall of Lord Muffin. All of it somehow hits the right note, equal parts nonsense and sincerity. And then the moment you've been dreading, the dog scene. There is no dog, not anymore. Instead, Kit enters wearing an elaborate bread golem costume, flour-dusted, crust-edged, and with 2 shiny apple slices for eyes. "Bark," he intones solemnly. The crowd erupts. It is without question the loudest reaction of the day. You glance toward the noble box and see a courtier laughing. Actually laughing. A velvet-cloaked, probably godfather to a duke sort of man laughing. Mistress Fletcher catches your eye from the wings and mouths. Don't mess this up. You don't. Act 2 deepens the themes lost love, gluten intolerance. A monologue about breadcrumbs and betrayal brings someone in the second row to tears. Or sneezes. It's unclear. By the time the final scene arrives, the crumb ascends, you feel weightless, exhausted and elated. The final line echoes out. May our crusts never harden. The curtain falls. The applause is instant and deafening. The courtier stands. Fringe tidbit. On rare occasions, standing ovations from nobles weren't just flattering, they were career-making. A single compliment passed to the right patron could elevate a playhouse, protect a troupe from censorship, or even earn a royal commission. There are stories of actors receiving gifts, gold coins, new costumes, even horses. Backstage, the cast collapses into a heap of sweaty, trembling joy. Someone sobs into a breadbasket. Tobias announces he will retire from theater and open a bakery for spiritual reasons. Kit kisses a prop onion and declares it his muse. Fletcher enters holding a sealed scroll. "From the courtier," she says quietly. "He wants to see more." You all scream. That night you celebrate. The tavern is rowdy, filled with patrons quoting lines from the show. A man offers you a beer in the name of the crumb. You toast back. You can't stop grinning. You were in a play about sentient bread and it worked. It really worked. Historians still argue whether plays like these were seen as genuine artistic achievement or just popular novelty acts. Some scripts survive with painstakingly silly notes, and her actor, as Pie Dog Pants, once then dies, audience must chant biscuit 3 times. Others were lost entirely remembered only in gossip and tavern songs. But the effects lingered. In the weeks that follow, The Crumb Awakens becomes the most talked about show in London. Other troupes try to copy it with plays like Dough and Deliverance or Yeast of Eden. None have the same spark. You, meanwhile, are cast in 3 more plays by Mistress Fletcher, none bread-related, thankfully. Yet every audience still asks, will the crumb return? Tobias builds a tiny puppet theater and performs crumb scenes for children in the square. Kit gets recognized in the street and signs someone's hat. Even the mayor begrudgingly lifts the dog ban, muttering something about more dangerous things in those plays than terriers. And you start to feel like maybe this is what being a proper actor feels like. Not the fame or the money, not that there's much, but the sheer joy of hearing a room full of strangers laugh because you made them believe in a bread rebellion. You walk home one evening, still in partial costume, and pause by the river again. The Thames glows under a fat silver moon. London hums around you alive, chaotic, beautiful. You whisper the crumb's final line again this time for yourself. May our crusts never harden. And you smile. You're not famous. Let's make that clear. No parades, no bouquets thrown at your feet, no mysterious benefactors offering you a country house. But in the strange little world of the Elizabethan stage, you've become a minor legend. Not for your tragic Hamlet, not for your stirring rendition of Richard III. No, you are and will likely forever be the one who made people cry over a loaf of talking bread. Still, you keep acting. The Globe keeps calling and you keep showing up. The roles vary sometimes. You're a ghost, sometimes a lovesick duke, once even a disembodied voice shouting from a trap door. But the crumb lingers. Every now and then, someone in the crowd will whisper "bread boy" as you pass. You pretend not to hear. You absolutely hear. Kit has leaned into it completely. He now wears a tiny crust-shaped pin on his collar and insists it brings good luck. Tobias continues his puppet shows. He's added a new character, Bagel the Wise. The kids love it. You're mildly horrified. Mistress Fletcher, however, is on a mission. She believes you've tapped into something important, something the other troops haven't yet grasped. Not just absurdity, not just novelty, but the delicate, ridiculous alchemy of laughter and heart. The crumb worked, she tells you one day, because it dared to take silliness seriously. You nod solemnly. Then you sneeze because someone powdered your wig too aggressively. Mainstream historical fact, Elizabethan troops were surprisingly experimental. While the surviving canon skews toward Shakespeare and the like records, show companies routinely performed comedic farces, mystery plays with talking animals, and dramas where inanimate objects delivered monologues. There's even a surviving script fragment where a man argues with his own shoe for 2 full pages. The follow-up script Mistress Fletcher commissions is tentatively titled Crumbs of Destiny. You beg her to reconsider. She doesn't. The rehearsals are chaos. Kit has written 4 new songs, none of which rhyme. Tobias insists that Bagel the Wise be included. You spend a full afternoon arguing whether the final scene should involve a bread duel or a ceremonial toasting. Somehow, through a series of compromises and 1 minor injury involving a falling candelabra, it comes together. The opening night is scheduled just after Harvest Festival. The city is drunk on cider and roasted chestnuts. Expectations are low. Good. That's how you like them. You step on stage with no idea what will happen, and the crowd loves it. Not in the polite, noble applause way, but in the one man actually falls off his bench laughing way. It's looser than the first Crumb play. Stranger, you wear a fake beard made of rye. The villain is a baguette possessed by jealousy. At one point, Tobias and Kit do a full choreographed bread dance routine that nearly collapses the set. But it works. It shouldn't, and yet it does. At the curtain call, someone throws actual crumbs onto the stage. You pretend to be annoyed. You're not. Fringe tidbit. There are a few documented cases of theater patrons interacting with plays so fervently they were written into future scripts. One troupe in Bristol reportedly added an entire scene because a woman kept shouting advice to the heroine during every performance. She had notes a letter reads. We respected them. After the show, you sit with the others in the courtyard, legs aching, voices hoarse, and cheeks sore from smiling. You know Kit says sipping something questionably herbal we could tour. You laugh, then stop. Wait. Seriously? He's serious. So is Fletcher. You don't have much, some props, half a script, a rickety cart. But you have the thing that matters, an audience that wants more. You hit the road. The tour is rough. Muddy roads. Bumpy inns. A horse that may or may not be possessed. But each town welcomes the crumb like an old friend. The bread puns multiply. So do the stories. One innkeeper swears she dreamed about the crumb whispering wisdom into her ear. Another claims his crops grew better after seeing the show. You can't explain it. You stop trying. Historians still argue whether this bread craze was a localized theatrical fad or part of a wider cultural shift. Some see it as escapism, a light-hearted reaction to the grimness of plague, years, and war talk. Others argue it tapped into something timeless, the absurd dignity of ordinary things. Whatever it was, it sticks. After 3 months, you return to London, tired, tanned, a little better at improvising when a goat wanders on stage mid-monologue. You sit once more by the river. You think about the boy who once stumbled through lines terrified of misplacing a comma, the actor who once lost sleep over who got to play the dog, the man who is now the public face of theatrical yeast, and you're content, more than content. You're grateful. Because in a world that so often takes itself too seriously, where kings make proclamations about pudding and nobles fight over sock colors, you got to help people laugh. Not just chuckle. Laugh. Deep belly roars that rattle ribs and make you forget about taxes, floods, and bad fish. You didn't write a masterpiece. You baked a memory. And you'd do it all again. The crumb takes on a life of its own. You no longer introduce yourself as an actor at the Globe. Now you're that fellow with the loaf, and somehow that opens more doors than you expected. Nobles who once turned up their powdered noses now lean in curious. Children tug at your sleeve in the market. Even the baker down the street offers free rolls for inspiration. One morning, a courier arrives with a scroll sealed in gold wax. You assume it's a tax notice. It is not. It's an invitation from the Queen's court. They've heard about the crumb. They want to see it. You sit with the scroll in your lap for a long time, watching the wax glint in the sunlight like a tiny sun. Kit practically bursts from excitement. Tobias immediately begins making a miniature version of the crumb out of lavender-scented soap. Mistress Fletcher doesn't say much, just nods and fetches her best quill. Performing for royalty is equal parts honor and migraine. You rehearse harder than ever. Every joke is polished until it squeaks. Every line is whispered like a prayer. The bread prop gets an upgrade golden crust hint of rosemary. Very fancy. The wardrobe mistress insists on ironing your sleeves twice. Kit writes a new song titled Rise Ye Glorious Gluten. You consider quitting twice, maybe 3 times. But the morning comes. The hall is massive. The chandeliers are shaped like birds. The Queen arrives swathed in what appears to be 27 layers of silk and judgment. You bow so low, your back cracks. And then action. You open your mouth. The crumb speaks. The room exhales. It's not loud laughter, not yet, but it builds. A chuckle here, a guffaw there. The Queen's eyebrow lifts precisely 1/4 inch at the bagel scene, which is practically a standing ovation. You hit your final line. Even crumbs have hearts, and for a moment there's silence, then applause. Actual applause. The Queen claps once. That's all it takes. The rest of the court erupts. Kit bows so hard he nearly knocks over a candelabra. Tobias beams. You just breathe. Mainstream historical fact. Performances for royalty were often stilted affairs heavy on pageantry and light on laughter. But there are a few recorded exceptions, times when jesters, comic actors, or odd little plays broke through the formal chill. Queen Elizabeth I, for instance, was known to enjoy sharp wit and once gifted a fool a gold coin for making her laugh with a limerick about sausage. After the show, you're handed a small pouch of coin and a curtsy from someone whose name you immediately forget but will brag about for years. The Queen says nothing directly, but you're invited back. You don't return. Not because you're ungrateful, because something changes after that night. You realize the crumb doesn't belong in palaces. It's for the people sitting on ale-soaked benches, the fishmongers, the chimney sweeps, the kids pretending their potatoes are dukes. So you bring it back to the Globe, to the muddy towns and wind-swept inns. One day you visit a village so small the stage is a cart and the backdrop is a clothesline. Rain patters gently through the whole performance. The audience huddles under cloaks and blankets. At the final bow, an old woman slips you a pebble. Best I can offer, she says, but that loaf he made me feel something. You still have the pebble. Fringe tidbit. Some traveling performers in Tudor England carried tokens, small keepsakes gifted by townsfolk after shows. These weren't just souvenirs. They were badges of honor, little physical echoes of stories told and memories made. A button here, a coin there. One famously kept a dried apple for 20 years, claiming it reminded him of the best laugh he ever earned. Back in London, years pass. You take other roles. The crumb retires, briefly. Then during a plague lockdown, bored, restless, everyone on edge, you perform a private show in the courtyard for a handful of neighbors. No sets, no orchestra. Just you, a stool, and the crusty old puppet. You barely remember the lines. The voice cracks halfway through. But when it ends, someone sobs softly into their sleeve. It was never about the bread. It was about connection. It was about taking this odd, messy, exhausting world and making it sing, even if just for a moment. Historians still argue whether plays like The Crumb changed anything, whether these low comedies left real marks or were just distractions, crumbs, lost beneath the banquet of history, but maybe that's the point. Not every story is a monument. Some are meant to be light, fleeting, comforting, like a warm crust in cold hands. You sit one evening on the same riverbank where this all began. The sky is a pink bruise above the rooftops. The air smells of coal smoke and wild thyme. Kit is gone now. Tobias runs a tiny puppet theater near the docks. Mistress Fletcher's plays are still performed, though now with more frogs for some reason. You miss them, but you're content. You feel the breeze on your cheek and the weight of all your performances behind you like pages in a dog-eared script. You close your eyes, and you remember. The stage is quiet now. The lanterns have dimmed. The laughter faded into corners, and the soft padding of shoes on wooden boards has stilled. You lie back on your mat or mattress, or maybe just your sofa, and let your muscles sink into the stillness. You're not carrying lines anymore. No punchlines, no nerves. Just the hush that comes after something well told. Outside, the world turns slowly. The wind plays gently in the trees. A cat walks the rooftops. The river slips past the city walls, silver and endless. And somewhere far off, a faint voice recites lines from a forgotten play, a whisper of joy drifting across time like candle smoke. You don't need to remember every word. The story was never about memorizing. It was about feeling. About that moment when the crowd leans in, breath held hearts open. That moment is still with you. Let it settle. Let it soften. You did your part. Night after night, shaving down the fear, lifting up the laughter, dusting off history's dry crust, and revealing the warmth within. Now the stage is yours to leave behind. The curtain falls not with a crash but a sigh. You've earned your rest. The crumb will rise again someday, but not tonight. Tonight, let yourself sleep. No lines, no audience, just quiet. End of script. Sweet dreams.